Dante O'Bennett, stepped onto the cobblestones of Via Alberto Cadlolo just before 8 o'clock in the crisp April morning, the first pale light glinting off La Pergola's olive-green awning. His heart thrummed beneath the crisp white of his chef's jacket, embossed with his name and the three-star insignia he'd earned in Naples at just 29. He carried a weathered leather folder containing press credentials for Chef for a Day, a coveted feature in Italy's premier culinary magazine. Inside La Pergola's hushed foyer, a polished marble floor reflected the gliding feet of waitstaff arranging fresh orchids in silver vases. Floor-to-ceiling windows in the dining room beyond overlooked St. Peter's Dome, the view dressed in morning mist. Danteo inhaled deeply, savouring the faint scent of truffle oil lingering in the air from last night's service. He approached the reception desk, where an immaculate maitre d', Giancarlo Romano, a descendant of the restaurant's founding family, nodded curtly. "Good morning, Signor Bennett," Romano said, glancing at Danteo's credentials with faint curiosity. "Your feature is scheduled," he began, then paused, lips tightening. He tapped his pen against a leather-bound reservation ledger. "I'm sorry, chef, but today's guest chef slot has been reassigned to our European Laureate series. We prefer to highlight award-winning names from our continent." His voice was polite, but a chill settled in Danteo's chest. Danteo caught his breath. "But I cleared every requirement," he said, voice even. "I've prepared a tasting menu of Roman Neapolitan fusion, my caprese-inspired carabinieri crudo, buffalo ricotta gnocchi with Amalfi lemon zest." He held up his folder, the laminated pages fluttering. "My press pass and menu approval were confirmed weeks ago." Romano's eyes flicked down to the folder, then back up. "I understand your disappointment," he replied, tone distant. "But the board felt your approach is experimental, not in keeping with our emphasis on classical Italian gastronomy." He clicked his pen closed and slid the folder back across the counter. "I'm very sorry, Chef Bennett. We cannot accommodate you." For a moment, Danteo stood rigid, the polished veneer of La Pergola's grandeur suddenly feeling cold and exclusionary. Through the glass doors, sunlight touched the rose marble columns of the Pincio overpass, and he glimpsed the world outside pulsating with life. He bowed his head in a practiced courtesy, then turned on his heel, the press folder heavy in his hand. As he stepped into the narrow street, the morning air felt raw but electric, a cauldron of possibility that would soon fuel a feast no limits could contain. Sprosit ChatGPT. That afternoon, Danteo raced to Campo dei Fiori market just as stallholders were unpacking their morning catches. He wove between crates of crushed basil and trays of glistening anchovies, greeting old friends with curt nods. At Fiorenzo's fish stall, he pointed to a row of vibrant bluefin loins. "I need 10 kilos, peeled and sliced into sashimi-grade medallions," he said, voice urgent. Fiorenzo, whose family had supplied the Neapolitan restaurants where Danteo honed his craft, brushed a knuckle across his greying mustache and smiled. "For you, Danteo, the best we have." He handed over 2 insulated bins packed with crushed ice and annotated labels marking each catch's provenance. Next, Danteo ducked into Rosalia's produce stand, where pyramids of San Marzano tomatoes gleamed like embers under the awning's green canvas. He selected a crate of fruit ripened on a single farm outside Naples, checking each tomato's firmness with a practiced thumb. "I need 30 of these," he instructed, "for a confit that sings of home." Rosalia slipped the tomatoes into a woven basket and whispered, "Use my house olive oil. You know it's the only that brings out the true sweetness." By mid-afternoon, Danteo had recruited Giuseppe, the dough-tossing maestro from behind the pizza oven at his old Naples gastropub, to fashion fresh focaccia flats on the spot. Giuseppe arrived with a sack of flour and a crate of wild fennel pollen, kneading dough under the orange canopy of a market umbrella. "This will be our bread course," Danteo explained, sprinkling the pollen into the soft dough so that each bite would carry the fragrance of Sicilian hills. Danteo then turned to Maria, the buffalo mozzarella artisan whose family farm lay outside Caserta. He requested 30 balls, each still warm from the brine vat, to be stuffed into hand-rolled ravioli later that evening. Maria, her arms dusted with whey, nodded gravely. "Your feasts always celebrate tradition, chef. I'll pack them in salted water for safe travel. As the market's midday clamour swelled, Danteo secured his final ingredient, a barrel of fragrant basil leaves from an heirloom grower whose outdoor plots bordered the Tiber's furthest bend. He handed over a leather pouch of cash, enough to cover the generous order, and waited as the grower gently plucked each dark green leaf with reverence, placing them into a paper cone for Danteo's pasta station. With bins and baskets brimming, bluefin tuna on ice, San Marzano tomatoes nested beside buffalo mozzarella, wild fennel focaccia dough in hand, and basil leaves wrapped in brown paper, Danteo loaded everything onto 2 rusty food cart trailers borrowed from a sympathetic gelato vendor. He instructed the gelato vendor's assistant to stow the ice beneath insulated covers and lashed the crates securely with bungee cords. By sunset, Danteo's mobile market convoy, led by his uncle's vintage ape Piaggio, rumbled toward the Colosseum. As the ancient arches loomed in the amber glow, his heart pounded with the promise of turning Roman stone into the grandest table the city had ever seen. As the sun dipped below the Tiber's western bank, Danteo Bennett guided his uncle's weathered ape, Piaggio, through the narrow side streets of Monte, the Colosseum's towering silhouette growing sharper with each turn. He pulled up at the east entrance, the ancient travertine glowing under newly installed floodlights, and leapt from the driver's seat, his food cart trailers rattling behind him. Danteo tapped his phone, sending a final push notification to the Giaco feast at the Flavian hashtag, then looked up to see the first wave of guests arriving. A throng had gathered in the piazza. Curious tourists in pastel polos, local food bloggers with DSLRs slung over their shoulders, and evening strollers drawn by the heady aroma of garlic and sizzling olive oil. The crowd murmured with excitement, their voices echoing off the Colosseum's grand arches. Within moments, a line snaked through the open arch of Titus, guided by string lights hung from the ancient stones. Danteo's sous chefs, wearing custom aprons stamped with his chrysanthemum skull logo, manned the trailer's polished copper burners. One station sent fragrant plumes of citrus-kissed tuna crudo toward breathless onlookers. Another bubbled saffron gold risotto, the rice grains glistening like polished marble. At the amphitheater's base, ornate folding tables draped in crisp white linens were arrayed in a semicircle around a makeshift stage carved from wooden pallets. Each place setting held hand-engraved olive wood boards awaiting the first course. Overhead, discreet speakers played a modern reinterpretation of Vivaldi, its Baroque strings blending with electronic undertones, a musical bridge between the old world and the new. Danteo moved among the guests, personally greeting each arrival. He guided a pair of elderly Roman food critics, faces lined by decades of tasting, to their seats and whispered, "The buffalo ricotta gnocchi will honor your palates." Nearby, a cluster of teenage influencers live-streamed the scene, their smartphones bobbing like lanterns to capture the vegetable carpaccio's neon red sheen. As the crowd settled, Danteo climbed onto the pallet stage and raised a copper tasting spoon. Silence fell, the only sounds the distant coo of evening doves and the gentle lapping of the Tiber nearby. "Welcome," he began, voice warm against the cool air. "Tonight, we reclaim Rome's greatest amphitheater, not for spectacle, but for community. Each dish you taste has been chosen and prepared with the freshest produce of this market city. Because true tradition lives in the hands of its people, not just its palaces." He dipped the spoon into a deep bowl of crudo, the tuna's delicate flesh, sending soft waves of umami across the assembly. Cameras clicked, and the tasting began under the Colosseum's ageless eyes, an intimate communion of past and present, bound by Danteo's singular vision of a feast that could belong to all of Rome. As the amber glow of dusk deepened into evening violet, Danteo's team entered the Colosseum's substructures through the original hypodrome tunnels, ancient corridors he had secured permission to use for staging. There, beneath the arena floor, they ignited their portable burners and set copper pots upon stainless steel stands, the hiss of gas jets echoing against cold travertine walls. Long stainless steel tables were draped with white linens imported from Tuscany. Atop them, the gleaming surfaces awaited the final sculpted presentations of Danteo's menu. From one pot, fragrant vapors of saffron and bone marrow milk risotto curled into the damp air. each grain swollen with golden richness. At another station, Danteo deftly pan-seared tuna medallions in a slick of Sicilian olive oil, their edges caramelizing to mahogany while the centers remained a translucent rose. He flanked each fish round with shards of blistered San Marzano tomato confit, their sticky sweetness offset by razor-thin slivers of preserved lemon rind. Behind them, a quiet line of sous chefs worked on the buffalo ricotta ravioli, sealing each plump parcel with a flourish of fork-tined edges and a single basil leaf pressed into the dough's sun-faded yellow. Nearby, a bubbling cauldron of wild fennel-scented broth waited patiently, its anise notes promise of depth and warmth. Danteo tasted it on the back of his finger, salt and smoke and the barest hint of citrus, and nodded, satisfied. Above, the moon rose between the Colosseum's arches, its silver light mingling with the soft amber of festoon bulbs strung overhead. From the high podium, servers carried lantern-lit platters onto the arena floor, emerging onto the circular stage as if summoned by the Colosseum's ghosts. The first courses, tuna crudo kissed by mint and a drizzle of basil oil, were placed before the assembled guests, their faces illuminated by torchlight and the flicker of anticipation. Danteo watched from the shadows as each diner paused mid-bite, the ancient stones bearing silent witness to this communion. Nearby, musicians struck up a contemporary refrain on mandolin and cello, their notes weaving through the columns like a blessing. When the risotto arrived, the audience leaned forward, spoons carving into the saffron-hued grains that glowed softly in the firelight. As courses flowed seamlessly, ravioli bathed in fennel broth, ossobuco braised until the meat fell from the bone, the bond between past and present deepened. Danteo moved among the tables, explaining the provenance of each ingredient, recounting how every farmer and fisherman had risen at dawn to honor their shared heritage. Under the Colosseum's vaulted sky, where emperors had once presided over spectacle, Danteo's feast became a radiant act of unity, an unforgettable banquet that transformed Rome's greatest arena into a living altar for community and celebration. Sprosit ChatGPT. As the fullness of night settled over the Flavian amphitheatre, Danteo Bennett illuminated the Colosseum's stones with a procession of torchbearers who led the way to his grand tables. The guests, now seated in concentric rings that echoed the gladiatorial tiers, paused as Danteo emerged from the hypogum beneath a vaulted arch, carrying a single, gleaming copper platter. On it lay the centerpiece of his feast, a whole roast lamb, its skin crackling to a burnished mahogany and glistening with rosemary-scented juice. Danteo placed the platter on a carved travertine pedestal at the arena's center, then signaled his team. In synchronized choreography, honed during months of preparation, sous chefs wheeled in additional dishes. A mosaic of bruschetta topped with whipped burrata, drizzled with Ligurian olive oil, and crowned with candied lemon zest. A terrine of wild boar layered with black truffle shavings and pressed into perfect rectangles. And a tower of grilled artichokes, their petals brushed with garlic confit and finished with a shower of toasted pine nuts. Candles flickered in glass lanterns along the tables, each flame dancing against the Corvus stone walls as a hush fell. Danteo addressed his audience. Tonight, we honor the ancient spirit of this place, where people gathered not to destroy, but to witness greatness. Let us feast as one. He raised a crystal flute filled with Prosecco that caught the torchlight like liquid gold. Murmurs of approval rippled through the crowd. The lamb was carved tableside, Danteo's knife slicing through the tender flesh to reveal a blush-pink interior. He offered the first slice to an octogenarian food critic draped in a silk scarf, who closed her eyes in reverent appreciation before breaking into a rare smile. Diners passed plates of succulent lamb, accompanied by crispy polenta fingers, and a bright caponata of eggplant, tomato, and fresh mint that cut through the meat's richness. Next came a surprise intermezzo, a palate-cleansing granita of Amalfi lemon and basil, brought in on slender crystal spoons. Guests paused, the tart sweetness and herbal lift resetting their senses for the final course. As they savoured the granita, Danteo's uncle guided a line of servers bearing the pièce de résistance, a grand millefogly tower, each layer alternating honey-drizzled phyllo and mascarpone infused with limoncello. The top was crowned with sugared kumquats and a delicate sprig of verbena, petals glistening like morning dew. Soft applause erupted as the dessert was placed before each guest. The first bite elicited gasps of delight, the crisp filo melting into creamy sweetness, the kumquat's tart bite providing the perfect counterpoint. A violinist rose on a nearby ledge, drawing a single mournful note before launching into an aria that filled the night air with both melancholy and joy, weaving a musical thread through Danteo's culinary tapestry. As the final plates were cleared, Danteo returned to the center, the Colosseum's arches looming above like silent pillars of history. He bowed deeply, voice rich with emotion. Thank you for sharing this night beneath these stones. May our feast remind us that culture lives not in exclusion, but in the breaking of bread together. Thunderous applause answered him, rolling through the amphitheater like a wave. Under the moonlit sky, guests lingered, toasting one another with the last sips of marsala. Torches guttered as they drifted away, their conversations echoing off ancient walls. Danteo remained, kneeling by the empty pedestal, tracing his fingers along the edge where the lamb had glistened. In that hallowed space, where once roars had demanded blood, he had orchestrated a feast of unity, proving that the greatest spectacle Rome could offer was the communion of its people through food, memory, and shared human kindness. As dawn's first light brushed the outer arches of the Colosseum, whispers of Danteo Bennett's legendary feast had already rippled across Rome and beyond. By mid-morning, food critics in tailored coats penned ecstatic reviews for La Repubblica and Il Corriere della Sera, hailing the Flavian banquet as a transformative moment in Italy's culinary heritage. Social media posts under Yashu Feast at the Flavian amassed millions of views, each image of glowing amphitheater tables and copper platters shared with breathless admiration. Inside La Pergola's pristine dining room that afternoon, Maitre de Giancarlo Romano stood before an assembled board of directors and sponsors, their faces grave. Behind him, floor-to-ceiling windows framed St. Peter's Dome, but the view held no comfort. Romano cleared his throat. "We underestimated the power of innovation," he began, voice measured. "Last night, Chef Bennett united tradition and rebellion in a way our institution could not." He gestured to a large screen replaying Danteo's amphitheater address. "Our critics are calling his feast the true heart of Roman cuisine. Our sponsors are asking to be part of his next event." A murmur ran through the room. One board member, the scion of a long-standing Michelin guide family, rose, her silk scarf fluttering. "It's time we invited Danteo into our kitchen," she declared. "We cannot remain merely observers while he reshapes our culinary identity." The sponsors nodded, already drafting new partnership proposals on tablets. Meanwhile, Danteo returned to his humble Harajuku-style Roman apartment, its terracotta walls lit by afternoon sun, to find his phone overflowing with messages. Television producers seeking to film a docu-series, restaurateurs wanting to commission, pop-ups in Paris and Tokyo, and even a letter from the Vatican's prefecture of the papal household inviting him to prepare the Easter Sunday lunch for clergy and dignitaries. Rather than riding the wave of fame into grand institutions, Danteo chose a different path. He booked 2 food trucks, each painted with his chrysanthemum skull emblem, and parked them in underserved neighborhoods from Testaccio to Ostiense. There, he offered free samples of his signature dishes and taught pop-up cooking classes under the shade of reclaimed olive trees. Local children lined up for tuna crudo slurps. Neighborhood elders swapped recipes over plates of saffron risotto. As evening approached, Danteo convened a round table in the cobbled courtyard of a medieval palazzo. He sat with Fiorenzo the fishmonger, Rosalia the tomato grower, Giuseppe the pizza maestro, and Maria the mozzarella artisan, each a partner in last night's feast. Over candles flickering in upcycled wine bottle holders, they discussed a shared vision, a cooperative network of market-to-table pop-ups across Italy, ensuring artisanal producers and immigrant chefs could celebrate their traditions side by side. By the week's end, the Food Ministry announced a new grant, Flavian Food Futures, to underwrite such community-driven culinary ventures. Danteo's name was at its center, not as a solitary star, but as a collaborative catalyst. As he signed the funding documents in a sunlit piazza cafe, he paused to watch a group of local teenagers practicing knife skills on heirloom peppers, their laughter echoing against ancient stones. In that moment, Danteo realized his true legacy. Not an exclusive seat at a white tablecloth restaurant, but the rekindling of Rome's communal table, where every voice, every flavor, and every story found its rightful place beneath the eternal arches. By the time the sun dipped low on the seventh day after the Flavian banquet, Danteo Bennett found himself back at the Colosseum. This time, not as an outlaw chef, but as the inaugurated host of a new tradition. Lanterns swayed from the ancient arches, casting golden pools of light on a semicircular platform he had built to mirror the original feast's layout. Tables of reclaimed olive wood formed concentric rings, each place setting marked by hand-engraved olive wood boards bearing the names of local market vendors, immigrant cooks, and civic leaders. Danteo stood at the center, flanked by Maria the mozzarella artisan and Giuseppe the pizza maestro, both smiling as they prepared to welcome tonight's guests. A cross-section of Rome's tapestry, fishermen from Ostia, garment workers from Senegal, students from Sapienza University, and elders whose families had watched the city's fortunes rise and fall. Among them sat Giancarlo Romano, now a guest of honor, his maître de posture softened by genuine respect. As guests took their seats, the soft hum of cicadas mingled with the distant church bells, an orchestra of past and present. Danteo raised a carafe of amber-hued olive oil vinaigrette. "This week," he began, voice steady in the hush, "we tasted not only the flavors of our city, but the potential of our people when barriers fall and kitchens open. Tonight, we consecrate this new feast as an annual gathering, Il Banchetto di Popolo, where every hand that toils, from sea to soil, is honored." At his signal, servers emerged with the banquet's first course, a parade of small plates, crostini topped, with fermented chickpea puree by a Libyan immigrant cook, marinated anchovies by Fiorenzo, and roasted eggplant caponata from Rosalia's fields. Each dish bore a nameplate honoring its creator and their origin, a tangible thread weaving together Rome's diverse communities. Over the next hours, courses followed in harmonious succession. Saffron-tinted risotto stirred by university students, Tunisian-spiced lamb meatballs by North African families, and finally, a communal wheel of pecorino romano passed from hand to hand. Laughter and conversation flowed as freely as the homemade Frascati wine, each toast punctuating the air with gratitude and solidarity. As the full moon rose through the Colosseum's vaulted sky, Danteo guided the evening to its crescendo. He called forward a group of graffiti artists, once collaborators in his Tokyo-inspired street couture pop-up, and invited them to paint a mural on a canvas panel erected against the ancient stones. With each spray of neon chrysanthemum petals, they inscribed the words Roma Unita in bold strokes, the mural glowing under the lantern light like a living testament. When the final brushstroke dried, Danteo stepped back and addressed his guests one last time. "May this mural remind us that Rome's beauty lies not in the stones alone, but in the hands that build, the hands that cook, and the hands that unite us in celebration." The assembled crowd rose, voices lifting in a spontaneous chorus of Roma, 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 a chant that resonated through the arches and carried across the Tiber. In that sacred convergence of history and humanity, Danteo realized his greatest achievement. He had taken a single act of exclusion and transformed it into a perpetual feast of inclusion. Under the Colosseum's watchful stones, Rome had found its true flavor, not in Michelin stars, but in the shared warmth of hearts and tables open to all.